Chapter 20 of That Mainwaring Affair. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. That Mainwaring Affair by A. Maynard Barber. Chapter 20. Opening Fire. The first witness called to the stand by Mr. Sutherland was James Wilson. There were many present who noted the resemblance between him and his son, John Wilson, who had given testimony at the inquest, though unaware of the relationship between them. "Mr. Wilson," said the attorney after the usual preliminaries, "I understand you were for a number of years in the employ of Ralph Maxwell Mainwaring, the testator whose name is affixed to this will. Is that so?" "Yes, sir," was the reply, while the attention of the crowd was at once riveted upon the witness. "Will you state how long you were in his employ, and in what capacity?" "I was his valet, sir, from his 25th year until the day of his death, a little above 35 years, sir, and during his last illness of about 3 months I was with him constantly, you might say, sir." "Do you recognize the document just read in your hearing as anything which you have heard before?" "That I do, sir." "State when and under what circumstances you have previously heard it." "At the deathbed of Mr. Ralph Mainwaring, sir, 25 years ago, the 17th of last November. I was present at the making of that will, sir, the night before Mr. Mainwaring died. I heard him give those words to the lawyer, and then heard them read to him before the will was signed." "By whom was it drawn?" "By Richard Hobson, sir, the man sitting there," pointing to the shrinking figure of Hobson. "Do you positively identify that man as the writer of this will?" "That I do, sir," with marked emphasis. "When one once sets eyes on the likes of him, he's not likely to forget him soon." "Was Richard Hobson the attorney of Mr. Mainwaring?" "Ah, no, sir," with evident scorn. "His attorney was Mr. Alfred Barton, the father, sir, of this gentleman," indicating the English barrister, while the interest of the crowd deepened. "How, then, was this man employed to draw the will?" "Mr. Barton was out of town, sir, and as Mr. Mainwaring was dying and naught would satisfy him but to have a lawyer, they brought Mr. Barton's clerk." "State the circumstances under which this will was drawn. Was Mr. Mainwaring influenced by any one to make it?" "He was influenced by none but his own conscience, sir. You see, sir, 3 or 4 years before he was very angry with his elder son, and cut him off without a shilling and gave everything to Mr. Hugh. But it broke his heart to do it, for Mr. Harold was his favourite, as indeed he was everybody's, though he never mentioned his name again until the night he made the will. Well, sir, all that day we knew he was dying, and he knew it, and he was restless till late at night, when of a sudden he tells us to get his lawyer. Mr. Hugh tried to put him off, and told us his mind was wandering, but 'twas no use, and the carriage was sent for Mr. Barton. And when word was brought back that he was out of town, it was sent again and brought back his clerk. Everything was all ready, and he was propped up in bed by pillows, his eyes burning as though there was fire in them. He repeated those words while the lawyer wrote them down, and then had them read to him, and at 15 minutes of 12 o'clock the will was signed and sealed." "You were present during the drawing up of the will?" "Yes, sir. I was present through it all, but not where the others saw me. When the lawyer came, Mr. Hugh told me to leave the room, but as I was going, his father called me back and bade me stay, and I was standing at the foot of the bed, hidden by the curtains of the canopy, so none but the old gentleman saw me." "Who else was present?" "Mr. Mainwaring's old friend, Sandy McPherson, Mr. Hugh, and the lawyer." "No one else? Were there no physicians present?" "There were physicians in the house, sir, but not in the room." "How long did Mr. Mainwaring live afterwards?" "He died at 5 o'clock the next morning, sir. His strength went fast after that was done, but he rested easy and seemed satisfied." "What was done with the will?" "Mr. Hobson took it away with him that night." "Have you ever seen it since?" "No, sir." "Mr. Wilson," said the attorney, showing the witness the will, "can you swear to these signatures as being the same which you saw affixed to the will upon that night?" Wilson studied the document attentively for a moment. "Yes, sir, that is Mr. Mainwaring's writing, only a bit unsteady, for his hand trembled. McPherson's writing I know, and you marked that blot after his name? I remember his fussing that night because he had blotted the paper." "And the third name, is that the signature of this man, Richard Hobson?" "I know naught about that man's writing," the old fellow replied, with a shrewd look. "But you will mind that the name is the same writing as the will itself, and he wrote that and signed his name to it, for I saw him." "And you have neither seen that will nor heard it read until this morning?" "No, sir." "You have remembered it all these years?" "Maybe not word for word, sir, but I have kept the sense of it in my mind." "Are you positive that this is the will drawn up on the night of which you speak?" "That I am, sir." "Did you ever speak to any one of this will?" "To none but my son, sir. Mr. Hugh Mainwaring was that sort of a man. I could not speak to him about it, or ask about his brother. I asked to be allowed to stay about the old place, in hopes that some day Mr. Harold would come back to have a look at his old home, and I could tell him of it, for I thought things had not gone right altogether. Then we heard of his death, and I thought it was too late. I could do no good by speaking, and I held my tongue until the young gentleman came." Wilson was then dismissed, and Hobson was next called to the stand. More even than the reading of the old will, the truth which had dawned upon Hobson's mind as he met the piercing gaze of the secretary had convinced him that the position which he had intended to assume, adverse to the new claimant and as an ally of Ralph Mainwaring's, was neither politic nor safe. His views on that subject had undergone a decided change, and with his usual weather-vane proclivities, he was now preparing to take a totally different stand and strive to ingratiate himself into the favor of the new heir, at the same time leaving, if possible, a few loopholes through which he could retreat should some veering wind change his course in another direction. "Mr. Hobson," said the attorney somewhat abruptly, when the necessary preliminaries were over, "did you on the night of November 17th, 18 , act as attorney for Ralph Maxwell Mainwaring in the drawing up at his request of his last will and testament?" "I believe so, sir," was the guarded answer. "Did you or did you not?" Mr. Sutherland persisted. "I did, sir." "Have you, during all these years, had any knowledge that the will you drew under the circumstances already mentioned was still in existence?" After a slight pause, the witness replied, "I had no positive knowledge to that effect." "Did you believe the will to be in existence?" Hobson reflected a moment, then replied cautiously, "I was led to suppose that the will did not exist." "You remember the form, terms, and conditions of the document drawn by yourself on that occasion?" "I do, perfectly," he replied, with more assurance. "State whether the will read in your hearing this morning is identical with the one drawn by yourself." Hobson now saw the drift of the attorney's questions, but it was too late. "As near as I can recollect," he stammered, but a word from Mr. Sutherland recalled him. "You just said you remembered perfectly." "I believe they are identical in form." "Mr. Hobson," said the attorney, spreading out the document before the witness, but still retaining his hold upon it, "will you state to the court whether that is your writing, and whether the last name, that of the second witness, is your signature?" With great precision, Hobson adjusted a pair of eyeglasses and proceeded to scrutinize the writing closely. "Well," he remarked at length, very deliberately, "I do not deny that to be my writing, nor am I prepared to positively affirm that it is such. The fact is my chirography varies so much from time to time that I often find it difficult for me to verify my own signatures." "Here are some papers that may assist the gentleman and may be of some use to the court," said a deep voice with rich musical inflections, but slightly tinged with sarcasm, and the English attorney handed a small package to Mr. Sutherland. "They contain," he added, "some specimens of the witness's chirography of about the same date as the will." "The writing in both cases is identical," said Mr. Sutherland, as having examined the papers he showed them to Hobson, but a glance at their contents seemed to rather confuse the witness than otherwise, for he remained silent. "Do you acknowledge these letters to be of your writing?" inquired the attorney. "I do, sir, and I have no doubt but that the other is my writing also." "You acknowledge this, then, as the will which you wrote at the dictation of Ralph Maxwell Mainwaring the night before his death?" "I believe it is, sir." "Mr. Hobson, why was this will not made public following Mr. Mainwaring's death and burial?" "On the day after his death I gave it to the keeping of his son, Hugh Mainwaring, at his own request, and he afterwards gave me to understand that it was lost." "And you were paid for keeping silent as to the existence of such a will, were you not?" "I may have been," the witness replied, with a calmness born of desperation. "That is sufficient for the present." A few moments followed in which the attorneys consulted together, while comments in tones of subdued excitement and expectancy were exchanged among the crowd. Ralph Mainwaring had sat with darkening face throughout the testimony thus far. Now he remarked to Mr. Whitney, with a bitter sneer, "Fine witnesses! A beggarly shyster whose oath is worthless, and an imbecile old servant who could be bought for half a crown." Young Mainwaring turned upon his father a look of indignant surprise. "Governor," he said, It would not be well for you if either old James Wilson or his son